From the very beginning, the forces of nature have shaped and reshaped our world. Against such forces, man has not stood a chance. The classical world of Greece and Rome is rife with stories of destruction and of old worlds that exist under the sea. As in the legend of Atlantis, whole cities have been torn apart or have disappeared beneath the ocean. But one of the greatest sunken cities lies not in the Mediterranean, but across the Atlantic in the New World. From here, in Jamaica, pirates and buccaneers raided Spanish galleons returning to Europe laden with gold and treasure. Discovered by Columbus in 1494, Jamaica had been in the hands of first the Spanish and then the British. A small fort was built on the end of a strategically important thin spit of land to the south of a large natural harbour. By the middle of the 17th century, at the centre of the West Indies, an infamous fortified town had been built up. In less than 40 years, Port Royal came to be known as the Sodom and Gomorrah of the New World, the wickedest city on earth. Protected by cannon and palisades, no enemy ship would dare approach. The whole Caribbean was fearful of the power of this place. Under the leadership of the famous pirate, Captain Morgan, Port Royal grew into a formidably prosperous city, trading in captured cargoes, loot, and slaves. Today, the people of Port Royal remain fiercely independent, with English and Scots names, McTavish, Brown, Wilson. They see themselves as distinct from the rest of Jamaicans. But then, as now, the inhabitants faced yet another terrifying threat. Hurricanes could cut through the exposed strip of land, dashing ships against the reefs, as they still do today. Not only that, Jamaica is situated on the southern end of the San Andreas Fault, so earthquakes and tremors may strike at any time. In the early days of June 1692, the temperature became unusually high. There was no wind. The sea was still, like glass. People became lethargic and exhausted. The sky grew red and dark. On the 7th of June, a few minutes before midday, the people of Port Royal heard a massive roar and felt a violent jolt. It was an earthquake of devastating proportions. A witness reported back to England. Several houses began to tumble down, and the church and tower. The ground opened in several places at once and swallowed up multitudes of people together. Whole streets sank under water with men, women, and children in them. Such crying, such shrieking. Nothing, in my opinion, could appear more terrible to the eye of man.
There were 2,000 buildings in Port Royal prior to the quake, and half of those were destroyed. The main parts of the town for commerce and shipping were right on the harbour. Thames Street, High Street, and Fisher's Row. And most of those streets went straight into the sea.
So there was just a violent jar over here, and the jar emulsified the sand. So you would have had houses on the surface just being jarred slightly for just probably fractions of a second, of a minute, and then just literally sinking straight down into the essentially liquid.
There were 8,000 people here, about 3,000 Africans, 3,000 mixed Europeans, and 2,000 a very odd mixture. But about 3,000 of those people were killed instantly, and 2,000 died of disease not long after.
You would have seen closer in the shore, you would have seen buildings actually standing up above water. They'd just be half submerged, and you would see toppled walls, you'd see a lot of floating debris, and you'd see a lot of boats of people out there salvaging the ships. Just in a matter of hours of the earthquake, you had people diving into the remains of other people's homes and gathering what they could.
The earthquake and subsequent tidal wave were catastrophic. "13 acres, 2/3 of the city, had sunk beneath the sea. At the peak of its notoriety, Port Royal was rent and frozen in time. Apart from the immediate aftermath, the streets and buildings have remained covered and undisturbed until recent times. Today, an American archaeologist from Texas, Dr. Donnie Hamilton, sets off to work to run a field school for students who are excavating a complete house from one of the most important submerged cities in the world.
All right, for the past 4 years, we've been excavating a house or a large building, a large brick building located on Lime Street. It faces on Lime Street and it's opposite of Queen Street and High Street. This area of Port Royal was the most highly built up and the most desirable section of Port Royal. This particular house is about 200 feet off the present-day shoreline, and it's in about anywhere from 10 to 12 feet of water. And you can see on this other map where we've got the floor plans built up. Put this down here. At the present, we have 5 rooms of the 6 rooms of this one single structure excavated. Now, from the size of the exterior walls and the interior walls, it appears that these front 3 rooms are storefronts, probably single story, while the back 2 rooms are probably storehouses, warehouses, and maybe even residences on the second story floor. And from the distribution of artifacts, which within each one of these, they serve different functions. And if we look at those, it gives us an idea of actually what the function of the rooms were. Now, in room 4, noted that kind of rectangular enclosure. Now, with almost perfectly within that enclosure, we found around 60 liquor bottles. Most of these liquor bottles were corked, still had brass wires going over the top of them, and in some of them there were still, a liquid content, which on analysis proved to just be seawater. No liquor left in them. But everything that's within that room, it appears to be, could well have been a tavern. Usually we find things because walls fall over on the floor. The reason why we probably found so much in this room is that this wall fell over in this direction, and all this was sealed beneath the brick floor and the wall. And so we found everything really beneath the floor and the wall. So back in 1692 and later, when they were salvaging the site, they couldn't get beneath the wall. So anytime we get a good wall fall, we find quite a few artifacts.
The expedition is sponsored by 3 separate organizations: the American Institute of Nautical Archaeology, Texas A&M University, and the Jamaican National Trust. Each year, 16 students work in 4 groups to be trained, encouraged, and watched over. In just 11 weeks, the students must be welded together as an efficient, underwater archaeological team.
Until you happen, you start running into the wall fall, then it's going to be some sort of a vertical face there, and then come up and start coming on the across the wall too. But I think it's going to end somehow.
The major objective for this season is to excavate the 6th and last room, which will complete the work on the first fully investigated house from the town. With a wall collapsed across the floor, hopes are high that trapped beneath there will be the remains of whatever was in the room that day in June 1692.
The site has probably more potential than any other 17th century English site in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It's an absolutely magnificent site. The archaeology is fascinating. The material you find, the preservation. It can be very problem-oriented archaeology, but it has to be approached very meticulously. And I don't think a lot of people will not be aware of the overall complexities of just trying to work out there in that environment. No clear visibility. Occasionally you can see 10, 15 feet, but sometimes I would say on the average we can never see, we see 3 or 4 feet. I remember a couple of the students said, well, the first week we were out there, he said, now we know exactly what to do. We're off, we moved to room 6, and Marco, for instance, who's had quite a bit of land experience, went down. He said, how do you expect me to do archaeology down here? I can't see my hand in front of my face, and you're trying to maintain stratigraphic controls, triangulating artifacts, and it just takes a period of adjustment before the divers even know which way is north and which room they're in, and turn 20 degrees or something like that, and still come back to where they were the moment before. Come on, when you get It's not just diving. In fact, the diving, to a large degree, is the most insignificant part of what we do, because we spend less time diving than anything else, even though we are under there 3 hours a day. But they will spend more than 3 hours a day writing notes, taking photographs, doing the documentation and the conservation. So it's a 12-hour-a-day job. Okay, chisel a hole down in here to one of the bottom edges somewhere, and then we break in up here, and then break into this portion of the clasp that's got a little bit.
Conservation is an unending job.
Yeah, we have a void.
Metal objects, unrecognizable with their covering of marine incrustations, are investigated with the help of a variety of dentists' drills. Some of the most revealing finds are the 17th century pewter, flagons, goblets, plates, complete with hallmarks and names. James Kelk from London, John Luke from Winchester, Simon Benning from Canterbury. Other finds have turned up from the Far East, India, Africa, as well as Europe. It was an extraordinary place. Sailors, dealers, and pimps got rich quick. Fortunes were won and lost overnight. It was a small version of Amsterdam, or London at the time. Port Royal was defended by 4 forts. Only one survived the earthquake intact. But today, the battlements look out across a rubbish dump where the land has been pushed up. Now, the walls of Fort Charles lie 200 yards from the sea. Later Victorian defences, installed to defend the Royal Naval Base, which was abandoned in 1905, show the evidence of tremors and subsidence that still threaten today. It was in 1965 that the government of Jamaica invited an American, Robert Marks, to conduct a salvage operation off the reshaped coast of Port Royal. A deep-water pier was to be built across the sunken city. If Marks could show the extent of the damage it might cause, the project would be stopped. With little time or money, Marks's techniques were crude. An airlift sucked artifacts and treasure from the silt. Nothing could be mapped or plotted into the site. But it did show the potential of what lay beneath the surface, and the pier has not been built. Then, in 1968, an Englishman, Philip Mays, excavated extensively up on land. Because of the low water table at Port Royal, pumps were used to drain the site as the work revealed street patterns and original foundations. Mays also set up a conservation lab and museum in the old Naval Hospital. Throughout the 60s and 70s, so much artifactual material was recovered that large quantities of finds were either dumped or left unrecorded to rot in tanks.
There's just a vast amount of artifacts that have been recovered, but there's been no adequate conservation. And over the years, for instance, all the material in this vat right here is probably an array of material all the way from the 1900s all the way back into 1692 and prior to the earthquake. And so this has been recovered from various archaeological excavations. And they're sitting here, they've had the incrustation knocked off of them, but you'll notice that these here are 3 axe heads, and there's not a number associated with any one of them, so Lord knows where they came from. And they have about as much archaeological significance now as if we went into Kingston and bought an axe head similar to this. These are really of no archaeological value whatsoever now, because we have a slightest idea where they came from or anything of that nature.
As well as neglected artifacts, today, discarded equipment lies around the old hospital grounds, like these pumps that can never be used again.
We've now started clearing off this area of room 6 through here to the north of the 2 grids that we have down. And in this area here, we've started hitting clusters of bottles. We've got 7 onion bottles scattered right through here. And there's several pipes are coming up, lead balls, quite a bit of pottery also. So it looks like we're going to run into a pretty large cluster of bottles in this area, northern end of room 6. This outer wall that's right here fell in this direction here, which last year we got into the edge of it, and the team down there now, they're uncovering it, and thus far it's extending, they've got about that much of it uncovered. That's all fallen wall. And the coral in this area is very thick. Some places it's almost a foot thick. So we're going in this area and stripping all the coral off. All layer 1, the silt, the eelgrass has already been stripped off. So now we're stripping all the coral off, coming down to brick rubble, and then we'll take the brick rubble off and go all the way to the floor. And everything, there should be quite a bit of material between the floor and the wall.
The layers of silt and coral, up to 3 feet thick, are cleared away by a dredge as the divers work their way down to the floor. Pumps force water back through the pipe, dumping any debris away from the site. It's the main piece of excavation equipment they have. On the surface, the small petrol engine pumps and compressor for the diver's air are constantly watched over and maintained. If the engine should stop, the whole project can be seriously delayed.
I don't think this raft has ever made it here anything like this. Engine barge. Barge. The pump has stopped working, so can't dig. So we're going to take it apart one more time. This one's giving us a lot of trouble, so we're going to see if we can get this key that keeps shearing fixed once again. We've always had one engine that, we always managed to get one more working, but now we're working from the two engines that we put together. We took the functioning parts out of two of them and put them together, and we got it working for about 2 hours, 3 hours yesterday. It's worked for about 30 minutes today. There's one little problem. No matter what happens, you always know something's going to go bad, go wrong, one way or the other. I came in under water archaeology through land archaeology, terrestrial archaeology, and I have threatened on many occasions to go back to land archaeology. It's much simpler. You don't have the problems of this constant, underwater archaeological excavations are so dependent upon machinery and equipment. And even in the best of circumstances, it's very difficult to keep everything running at one time. And there's always problems of customs, of bureaucracies, American Airlines, etc., of getting things in here. So if something breaks down and we can't get it locally, we have to get it thrown in. It can, knock us off for days. And a land excavation is never completely dependent upon one thing being present. You can always work around it. But, if one pump doesn't work or one compressor doesn't work, nobody's working as far as excavations go. So I have thought on many occasions that land archaeology is much simpler. The complexities of digging a site like Port Royal are just astronomical. And then when you combine that with the fact that this is a field school where you're starting off with raw recruits every year. At the most, I have 1 or 2 people that were with me the year before. And maintaining a continuity and working with these raw recruits and trying to get them to working as a team. So a project like this is almost dependent on the drive of the project director. And if he starts burning out, the whole thing starts tapering off. And it gets a little tiring after a while.
With the pumps out of action, Donny is forced to divert his resources to another task. If the precise location of the lost Fort James, now hidden in the harbour, can be established, an up-to-date and accurate chart of the sunken portion of the town could be worked out.
It's quite a bit different from our normal operation procedures because we're going to be diving on with Kirby Morgan full face mask, which has a communication system back to the surface. And so we do have verbal communication back and forth between the divers and back to the surface. In that particular area, it's about 20 to 30 feet deep. There's a ledge there. In fact, the ledge may be actually formed by the walls themselves as you're coming off the fort and then dropping off the harbor side of the fort. And we're hoping mainly to find some massive walls. We know it's kind of in a hexagon shape, and so we're just looking for massive walls more than anything else.
A line is run out from a known point along a compass course to help with the systematic search.
How's the visibility down there, Donnie?
I have a little bit of trouble clearing my ears down here, so when I look at my computer at the moment.
Can you tell Teresa she's under the barge?
Donnie, if he wants me to finish the line out.
Donnie, do you want Teresa to finish the line out?
No, that's not far enough.
That's far enough, Teresa.
I'll tie it off right here. The bottom is very floundery.
Donnie, are you in visual contact with Teresa?
No, I'm not. No, Donnie, I'm at the end of the A line.
Donnie, Teresa says she's at the end of the line.
Okay. Let's see. It's right down here. You have depth gauge on us up there? Okay.
It's frustrating for the divers. Terrible visibility, strange irregular shapes and coral heads. Any thoughts of standing walls or buildings are abandoned, and the dive is called off.
Just a second. Now what?
Isn't that a wooden beam that was down there?
Oh yeah, it's the old beacon. There's a lot of interesting coral heads, but they're also, if they're anything to do with brick walls or anything like that, you'd have to chisel off the face.
Yeah, it's really
I found one brick, but then I picked it up and there was fish line around it, so it's someone's fishing weight.
There's a lot of relief down there that looks very unnatural, and it's probably buildings just completely some kind of structure silted over and coral growth on it and everything else, but there's definitely a lot of relief that seems sharp and not exactly natural.
But what of the fort?
Unless it has something to do with those rock ledges, they're just
there's some
those
real
ledges that
sharp
just drop off and they're just almost vertical. But if it were a brick wall or a rock wall, then you'd have to, chisel off all that marine growth on it in order to actually determine it. And we didn't have a hammer down there to chisel off that face.
But will the search for the fort go on?
Yeah, the next two divers are going to go in, and so they'll be working off that. Every angle that we turn, you still are going across that rock, that face there. So they'll take that rod and chisel around a little bit on one of those faces and see if there's any bricks. But all the time when I was down there, I couldn't see any bricks or any cut rock or anything else. It's pretty barren down there. It's not much to see.
What I see here is a long cylindrical object. Looks like a cannon because at one end I've got it tapers from one end to the other.
What they think might be a cannon could well be a lost torpedo. An urgent message is passed down to the divers to take great care.
Other attributes that would make me think it's a cannon. It might be just a piece of wood. There you go. I'm handing Walker the chisel so he can take a couple blows.
It turns out to be the remains of an old channel marker, of no value or danger at all. The divers must content themselves with taking samples from Donnie's newfound walls.
We've been looking for a Fort James that was constructed of bricks, and we couldn't find any bricks whatsoever, but we have some rather massive, just literally kind of concrete-like structures where it looks like, in fact, it's very obvious what they did was lay courses of cement and then let that dry, then build it up a little bit higher and then pour another layer of cement. So you have coarse mortar or coarse cement going across constructing these walls. So we have some sections out there that are like 9 feet square that are just constructed entirely of this real fine aggregate concrete, literally. I'm pretty sure this could be Fort James. In fact, we have one 90-degree angle in there, not quite 90 degrees, that could be the leading corner of the fort. And it's really kind of a tower out there, not a round tower, but kind of a five-sided, pentagon-sided structure out there. So I think instead of being constructed of bricks, it's constructed of just really an aggregate like this.
The morning ferry from Kingston arrives at Port Royal. On board is Richard McClure, avid reader of Dickens and Shakespeare. His job, to unravel the mysteries that lie in racks of cardboard boxes in a warehouse at the museum. Despite his impossible task, Richard treats every article as if it were his own. A simple inventory of the finds from previous excavations will take him years to complete.
This actually, again, this is marks. And pewter spoons, 17th century. Well, the only complete pewter spoons that we have found have been recovered from the water. No, neither in Filmy's or Priddy's excavations have we found any. So these are quite a find, because apart from the pewter, we have some silver. But unfortunately, we don't know who these things actually belong to. You get some owner's initials. I don't know if you can see this. I-S-A. Now the S will be the husband, the initial of the husband's surname. The L, his Christian name. And the A would be the initial of the wife's Christian name. But there's a lot of work to be done to try and find out, wherever we have an owner's initial, to try and just find out who owns these things. I'm making a very detailed inventory of everything that's in here. I should start seeing daylight in about 3 years' time, if I can, go along without any sort of interruption. What a nice little art. Now this is one of my favorite little pieces, a little measure. This is continental measure. Now this is a very fine flagon. Now this was recovered by Link around the end of the 1950s, 59. Unfortunately, the lid is missing, but it is a very nice piece. Oh yes, there's something else I want to show you. I've got to be careful with this. 2 Rhenish stoneware jars. Now these were recovered by Edwin Link back, I think, in 1959 when he was diving. Here. This is one of the nice brown salt glazed stoneware. And then there's another one, the younger brother to this. Eventually these things will be on display as we expand, and increase the size of our museum. Ultimately, I hope it will bring more visitors to Port Royal, which in turn will mean the upgrading of the town. Actually, this I'm going to have to do this over again. This is a little another Rhenish stoneware. Somebody put it together, but it'll have to be redone. What I find, the more you handle the artifacts, the better you come to, you know them. I may pick this up, I don't know what it is. All right, I have a good look at it, I put it back. But one day I'm going to come across probably a publication and say, but I got this thing in Link, or in Marks, or in Mays, or in Priddy's collection. And
This looks suspicious.
Should we, John?
As all of you know, we're having trouble with our pump, so we're going to have to get one of them back together this morning, if we can get it back together working. And once we do get it back together, we're going to, since the suction is not as good as it should be, it's hard to have be running two pumps, two dredges. So we're going to come up and investigate this one little area of room 5. Room 5 has a herringbone pattern on the floor. However, there's this one little anomaly right down here in the southwest corner, and that all the bricks are laid in more or less an English bond pattern. It seems rather apparent that these bricks have been pulled up at one time or the other, and then they've been laid back down. Now, it's always bothered me, why do we have a break in the pattern? Because they took really a lot of pains in building this particular floor, even cutting out little notches, corner notches. So we thought we would take the floor up and see what was beneath the floor. So what we're going to do is take up this floor and dig down with the dredge and see if there's anything. And if there's not, there's not. And if there is, it might be exciting.
Hidden under a cupboard, the floor must have been lifted for a reason. To hide a body or some treasure.
Just a random pattern of bricks in the floor, nothing particular in there. We did get a good cross section across the wall though, so we could see exactly how the wall was constructed. So it wasn't wasted anyway. No mother-in-law, no treasures, nothing but bricks and the rubble from some previous excavation, construction probably.
As one mystery is solved, another serious problem is about to begin. A problem everybody dreads at this time of year.
Well, we've got a storm coming in, and should be hitting here sometime this afternoon, and the visibility is dropping rather rapidly out there. We expect a hurricane every year, but we've been lucky we've never had one. And this is not a hurricane, but it is a tropical depression. Anyway, the seas are supposed to be quite rough, so we sure don't want to have the barge or any of the divers in the water. So we're going to stop working right around noon and go down and anchor at real 4-point anchors so that we don't have it banging up against the barge, but mainly just to get safety's sake, to get the divers out of the water in case this storm is very severe. It's just one of the things just you kind of expect, and you don't get too excited about them. Just make preparations, and mainly, safety's sake more than anything else. We just don't want any students in the water, anything like this coming up. So, nothing out of the ordinary, I don't guess.
Once we get into shore, we'll have to secure everything down.
During the night, power lines were blown down. 2 girls running for home were struck and killed. It's a tragedy for the town. They leave behind them 7 children. Port Royalists know only too well what the forces of nature can do to their narrow strip of land. The diving teams press on. With only a few days of the project left to complete Room 6, there is a new sense of urgency as 2 teams start clearing away the rubble and exploring beneath the wall fall.
We have about 2/3 of the room excavated now, so after 4 years we're about to get one complete house completed. Room 6 is built in the same way as the other 2 southern rooms, and added on to the original 3 northern rooms. Has looks like an alignment of posts along toward the west end, which probably is some sort of enclosure there. It's pretty much the same as the other. It wasn't the rooms were not plastered or whitewashed. The ceiling we do know was plastered from the amount of plaster we're finding on the floor, where it fell straight down during the earthquake. Thus far, though, we've only found quite an array of onion bottles and a lot of pipe stems and pipe bowls. But other than that, there haven't been really that much many artifacts within the room.
The painstaking work has finally confirmed that the house must have been a tavern, with storage rooms to the rear. There is a great sense of satisfaction that at last one complete building from the town will have been uncovered. But there are literally hundreds more to be found. The King's Wharf, warehouses and forts. For the divers, the final task is to release the remaining bottles from the debris, gather them together and bring them for the first time in 300 years to the surface.
I would like to see at some time or the other, an interpretive center put up, a cofferdam around a small area of the site, not a really large area, and maybe even just a wharf going out into the area in which we're excavating now. And so where people can walk out there and actually look down in the water that's filtered, and you can see, for instance, the foundation that we're working on at the moment. And then take something like that that's archaeological. We know pretty much everything that can be determined about this building, and reconstruct a building like that up on land, so where people can see the actual building out on the water, the reconstruction up on land, similar type artifacts that we found in the house on the surface, and start on that sort of scale. It's kind of a base point to work from. And then have the museum oriented more toward just the archaeology of Port Royal, and more of an interpretive display than, say, what's in the museum at present.
Whatever the future holds, with only 5% of the lost section of the town explored, it is beyond doubt that great discoveries still remain hidden and undisturbed. Under the silt lie untold secrets from the disaster that overtook Port Royal in 1692. The process of rediscovery will now go on, inexorably, house by house, street by street, for years to come. John.